Today we're going to start by describing the fake company that we use for cases throughout this course. We're going to go into a little bit of detail about management for the company and some of the bios and a little bit about how the company is structured. We'll be adding to that throughout the course in ways that add to the cases that we'll be presenting later on. So you'll get a lot of detail today about this company, and then we'll move on later in later lectures about more detail. So let's get started with a description of HackMeCo, which I describe as a study in poorly chosen company names. Oddly enough, company naming and this kind of thing is a real issue in information security. A real company that I've worked with in the Seattle area is called Space Labs. Space Labs Medical, a wonderful company that does fantastic work, is unfortunately targeted by people who think something called Space Labs is a fascinating place to go after. They are a well-protected company that does an excellent job of information security, but the name itself is yielding for them an issue as they move forward. So I've aptly named our fake company HackMeCo, just to give a flavor for the kinds of things that you'll see out there. So the basics. HackMeCo is a holding company formed by a parent company called Stop Eating Cheese as an investment vehicle. What that means is HackMeCo owns primarily other companies. They have various degrees of ownership in both private and public companies, which are directed by the holding company's goals in terms of an investment strategy. And we'll talk a little bit about what that strategy is as well. HackMeCo invests in companies that it believes can see revenue growth through better management of IT resources. This is an interesting strategy, actually, in that if you can improve IT to the degree where you save money, you actually have done something, your strategy includes doing something difficult, but relatively low cost. So further investment is minimal, and barriers to other people to enter into this area is fairly steep, because doing IT well is surprisingly difficult. So that's the company strategy, and they've been extremely successful with it. Depending on the level of ownership in their various investments, IT resources can be separate. In other words, the company we've invested in is completely autonomous in how they do IT, or shared, in that HackMeCo has interesting resources in terms of how they do database management, for example. They have lots of good DBAs that know their stuff, and maybe the company we've invested in is not as good, and they could share our resources in that way. Or outsourced, in which case it's not HackMeCo's resources or the subsidiary's resources, but we've chosen to have somebody else entirely do that for us. And we'll see examples of all of those as the course proceeds. And in fact, sometimes, and this is common actually for holding companies tend to believe that it's best to see synergistic relationships between the various entities that they work with. So they will strongly suggest to the organization that they've just acquired, or one that they're taking a look at, there's this other company that we also have a large stake in that does a really good job at this thing that you're struggling with. Why don't we use their resources? So it ends up being a very complicated web of resources and how those resources are handled. So let's move on a little bit into statistics for HackMeCo, which I'll abbreviate often as HMC. They are a publicly traded US-based company with a presence in 143 nations. Each of those aspects will end up being important to how we look at information security for HackMeCo. The fact that they are spread across multiple nations is important, and we'll talk about why. The fact that they are US based is important. I know not all of you students are in the United States, but you could apply this to any nation. The ownership of the company itself directs regulatory compliance in interesting ways. And the fact that you actually have to be compliant with your own laws and often others is a fascinating piece of what we do. Investments include financial sector, healthcare, internet startups, and utilities. What I've done here is actually chosen areas that I specifically do consulting work in. I do more than just this list, but these are some of the more interesting ones. Those of you that have worked a little bit in these areas will know these tend to be the most highly regulated sectors in any industry or any nation or any regulatory environment that you'll find. Financial regulation, unfortunately, got the entire planet in trouble a little while ago by not properly doing it very well. Healthcare is a concern of everybody in terms of privacy and just safety. And we'd like to be able to share healthcare information broadly. If you're struck by a vehicle on a street in a city that you don't live in, you absolutely want the EMT that shows up to have detailed information about your medical history. And yet, sharing that same information is a privacy concern. So this is actually going to be thematic of things that we do in this class. It's going to be this marrying of our concerns about privacy and security with our need to do business. And sometimes that business is the business of healthcare, which keeps us alive. So you're going to see that over and over again. Internet startups actually are not typically all that regulated. They're fun from an information security aspect in that they tend to take extraordinary risk. Again, one of the themes that you're going to hear a lot is that our job is helping people take risk. There's no such thing as zero risk. So when we're working with people, the idea is to help them take exactly the risk that they intend to and no more. So internet startups are always a fascinating study in this. Utilities are a lot of fun in that anything that gets labeled national infrastructure or critical national infrastructure gets a lot of attention. In the past, utilities have been relatively well protected against cyber intrusion in that SCADA systems were often completely separate, not internet connected, and physically protected from attack in many ways. That is no longer the case, as worldwide initiatives in moving digital systems to the edge, in producing more and more digital information from your individual consumers, power meters, back to corporate headquarters happens. Those well-protected systems that weren't connected to the internet are suddenly not just connected to the internet, they're connected to every one of our homes. So utilities are a fascinating area to delve into from a cybersecurity standpoint. The impact related to a compromise of a utility is very high, and because of the size and the scope of utilities, the likelihood that they would be attacked is very high as well. So they end up being interesting for us. And HMC has ownership in each of these areas. At any point in time, HMC is at almost every stage of acquisition, integration, and sale of companies from their portfolio. If you imagine a company that does this for a living, as time goes on, they will be acquiring a new company, selling off assets of some sort, either the assets of a company or an entire company, integrating a company that they've already acquired into current systems and so on. There's not any time in which they're just doing one or two of these things. They're always doing all of them. And as you might imagine, for us, that creates the optimally complex information security scenario. That, in fact, we're having to deal with every single strange and difficult kind of concept in information security that any company ever encounters, which is why I designed our fake company exactly like I did. HMC has 150 employees who work for the company directly and about 40,000 in associated investments, 40,000 people. That's actually fairly common and mirrors a few companies that I work with that are holding companies. The holding company themselves tends to keep overhead very low. You don't need a lot of folks to manage mergers and acquisitions. You just need a very small cadre. And the 40,000 number probably would accommodate a reasonable sized portfolio of maybe 20, 30 companies. So that is HMC in a nutshell. Let's go into management, and then we'll conclude our introduction to our fake company. So management includes the CEO, H. Smith. He's a Harvard MBA, former CEO of North Pole Toys. And we'll get to his bio in a little moment, along with the bio of the rest of management. CFO, P. Barnum. He's a Wharton MBA. The CIO, C. Bamford, formerly director of IT for Nile Web Services. Oh, and by the way, any resemblance of any of these names or companies is purely coincidental. I came up with them off the top of my head as I was writing this slide. And lastly, one of the most important people in the company, especially as far as you're concerned, the CISO, the person in charge of strategic direction for information security for the company, Mr. Stu Dent. And often that will be you. H. Smith, he's a 1975 Harvard MBA. And I'm not picking these dates randomly. Often the management of a company like this is experienced folks who did not grow up in the digital age at this point. Decades from now, that'll change. Right now, the people in charge, the people making risk decisions, did not grow up with an iPad or an iPhone in their hands. They did not grow up with the internet. Many of you students won't be able to even conceive of not having the internet, but these folks are not native to it. It's new for them. He is, came from Canadian-based North Pole Toys, Inc., where he revolutionized wooden toy manufacture. See, this is an old guy, wooden toys. Realizing a 200% increase in profitability over 10 years, he carries the latest gear at all times. This is another kind of typical characteristic. Somebody in this position has a lot of money, which means he can afford the best laptops, the finest eye gear, and the most expensive storage available, imaginable, and calls help desk when his e-phone runs out of battery power. These are the people that we have the responsibility to inform about cybersecurity risk. This is not a strange profile. This isn't something I really pulled out of a hat. This mirrors many of the people in this kind of position. Your job is to explain cybersecurity risk in a way that this person understands. So I'm giving you real world activities in terms of the kind of mentality that you're working with. And by the way, I also want to say, failing to educate this person for cybersecurity risk means you fail. It doesn't mean they're stupid, because they're not. This is a Harvard MBA. It doesn't mean that you've done your best and that was good enough. It means you failed to do your job. And that's just the stark reality of it. P. Barnum, 1988 graduate of the Wharton School of Business, specializes in mergers and acquisitions, responds to email on a weekly basis, and often forwards cartoons of large ducks smashing computers with a hammer to the IT staff because he thinks that's really funny. You're getting the idea. Management is typical management. Those of you that may have a little more extended work experience than just students will recognize these particular characters. Almost to the end, C. Bamford, self-taught information technologist with something to prove. He doesn't have any degrees, but he's been at this for quite a long time. He knows more about information systems than you, just ask him. These folks can be among the most difficult for us because they refuse to be educated. The others realize they have limitations in these areas, and you can carefully get them to listen to you. Unfortunately, the Bamfords of the world struggle with this. They don't want to admit there's anything they don't know. With 20 years of experience in consulting and a degree in computer science, I'm willing to say to all of you, there's a ton I don't know. Being willing to admit that early and often, and educate yourself, being able to talk to others and learn from them is, I think, critical to consulting in this area. And in a way, I'm teaching each of you to be consultants. It's what I know best. It's what I think, even within an organization, most IT people need to be. Last but not least, by any means, Stu Dent. Stu is you. For the most part, we'll be putting you into the role of the decision maker for the organization with respect to information security strategies and solutions. And having been in that role for a number of years, I wish you good luck. With that, I'm going to conclude our discussion of the introduction for the fake company. I think you have enough at this point to proceed with decision making and some control selection, which is what we're going to do next.